Mother's Day was in May, Father's Day is in June. I couldn't find a widely agreed upon, commonly observed non-binary Parents' Day, but a group in Los Angeles called LA Genderqueer Parenting has been celebrating it in April the past few years, so let's go with that. Happy, extremely belated non-binary Parents' Day to any non-binary parents who might be watching. Sorry I missed it. In July, there's Parents' Day, which I guess covers everybody. So, hang on. What if I have a mother and a father and, I don't know, a non-binary step-parent? Does that mean I'd be obliged to celebrate non-binary Parents' Day in April, Mother's Day in May, Father's Day in June, and Parents' Day in July? That's 4 straight months of dinners with assorted combinations of my parents. Plus, April also has Easter, and May has Memorial Day. That's 6 family get-togethers in 4 months? To paraphrase the amazing Colossal Man, what sin could a person commit in a single lifetime to bring that upon themselves? Speaking of Star Trek, since we're now in the middle of Parent Summer, I thought it would be fun to examine some of the Star Trek characters who have had children and done either a really good or really terrible job raising them. In this little video, which I'm calling, Who Are Actually Star Trek's Best and Worst Parents? Let's begin with one of the worst parents in Star Trek, though I must tell you, this one is on the list not so much because he's such a terrible parent. He is, however, I'm going to talk about way shittier parents, but because he's arguably the lead protagonist of the entire franchise. I'm speaking, of course, about James T. Kirk. Original recipe, that is, not extra tasty crispy. Kirk is sometimes referred to as a deadbeat dad, but I don't think that's entirely fair. For one thing, Dr. Carol Marcus, the mother of Kirk's son David Marcus, makes it clear that she wanted to raise David herself, without Kirk's involvement. And in the post-scarcity economy of the Federation, where money no longer exists and everyone's basic material needs are met, child support presumably wouldn't be an issue. But that doesn't let Kirk completely off the hook. Sure, maybe he didn't need to be a part of David's life, but he could have at least kept up with him. When the away team runs into the scientists in the Genesis cave on Regula, Kirk doesn't even recognize David at first. Not being involved in the kid's life is one thing, but to lose track of him to the point that he doesn't even know him on sight? That's low, man. He's never asked Carol for a picture of him? He hasn't kept track of David's education or scientific career. He's never Facebook stalked him. What kind of a scumbag doesn't even Facebook stalk his own child? Of course, maybe the reason Kirk paid so little attention to his son's life prior to running into him on Regula is because Kirk didn't want kids in the first place. And if that's it, hey, good for him. I can definitely relate. I never wanted kids either, so I didn't have any. And if I, a person of unremarkable intelligence, living in an era where the most commonly used method of birth control for people with my equipment is to pull a rubber tube over the intromittent organ, can somehow manage to avoid having children, surely in the technologically advanced and economically liberated 23rd century, Jim Kirk could have done the same. But he didn't. For whatever reason, he had a child with Carol Marcus, and Carol apparently thought so little of his prospects as a father that she told him to just leave her alone to raise the kid herself. To be fair, once Kirk reconnects with his son as an adult, he seems ready to step up and become a more active, involved part of David's life. He might have proven himself a good father after all, but he doesn't get the chance because in the very next film, well, Klingon bastards, you know the story. Since the first bad parent I talked about was a character from the original Star Trek, let me choose some good parents from what is, as of this recording, the most recent Star Trek show, Star Trek Picard. We only get to hang out with them for one episode, but Will Riker and Deanna Troi seem like awesome parents, don't they? Their lives have been touched by tragedy when we encounter them in the episode Nepenthe. Their son Thad has been dead for a few years, but their surviving child, Thad's younger sister Kestra, seems like such a cool girl. A little weird, a little kooky, but since when is that a problem, especially for a child? Kestra seems smart, happy, she gets along with both her parents. All in all, an awesome kid. And awesome kids don't just happen. They're usually the products of awesome parents. And I have to tell you, seeing Will Riker and Deanna Troi as a happily married couple living in semi-retirement with their cool preteen daughter is one of the high points of the Picard series for me. Despite its flaws, which I've talked about in other videos, I liked the Picard series in general, and Nepenthe is my favorite episode. That's not such a surprise on one hand. Riker is one of my favorite characters, so I was all but guaranteed to love any episode where I got to see him again. But on the other hand, I wasn't such a big fan of the Riker-Troi marriage. When Star Trek Nemesis began with their wedding, it felt to me like a lazy creative decision made by a writer who couldn't think of anything better to do with either character, and I think the treatment of both Riker and Troi throughout the rest of that film bears this out. So, to revisit Riker and Troi in the Picard series and find that they're happy, a touch of melancholy regarding Thad aside, healthy, and they've made a warm, loving, wonderful life for themselves and Kestra is really gratifying and a bit of a relief. It's a relief not just because of my initial skepticism of their marriage, but because in-universe, neither Will nor Deanna seems to have had much in the way of positive parental role models. We don't know much about Will's mother, other than that she died when he was still young, but we know that his father was a raging dickhead who used to cheat to beat Will in wacky blindfold karate. Deanna also lost a parent at a young age. She was 7 when her father died. And her mother... Okay, so Lwaxana Troi is easily my least favorite character in any Star Trek show ever, but I know she has her admirers, so I'm not going to go off on a rant about how annoying and poorly written and terribly acted and generally repellent I find her to be most of the time. Instead, I'm just going to propose this, very simply. Whatever you think of her as a character, whatever you may find to be likable or admirable about her, judging by what we see on the show, she's not a great parent. She constantly attempts to interfere in her adult daughter's life. She repeatedly embarrasses her in front of her friends and colleagues. She pouts and guilt trips when Deanna tries to stand up to her. I wouldn't want her as my aunt who I only have to see once every few years, let alone my mother. But when we catch up with her on Nepenthe, Deanna seems like a great mom, with a child who isn't seething with resentment after a lifetime of emotional abuse and manipulation, despite what a shit show of a mom Lwaxana was. Or maybe because of that shit show, like Deanna just thought, what would my mother have done in this situation? And did the opposite, and it worked every single time. We first get to know Will Riker and Deanna Troi during their service together on the Enterprise D, though they don't get married and become parents until years later. But there were some parents serving alongside them during those glory years of Star Trek The Next Generation. Some were good, and some were Worf. Another marcher in Star Trek's seemingly endless parade of absentee fathers, Worf first learns of the existence of his son Alexander early in TNG's 4th season, when Worf's old flame Kalar beams aboard the Enterprise with the boy by her side. When Kalar is killed by Duras, Worf does what any responsible parent in his situation would do. He kills Duras back. Then he sends Alexander to Earth to live with his grandparents, Sergei and Helena Rozhenko, the human couple who adopted Worf after his biological parents were killed. Worf just gives his son away to another family because, what, he thinks it's too difficult to raise the child himself? If he's going to carry on like that, he should resign from Starfleet and start a YouTube channel. And Worf almost gets away with it too. He comes so close to escaping any significant parental responsibility, I bet he can taste it. But then, midway through season 5, Helena shows up on the Enterprise with Alexander, and she tells Worf, "You take him. Your father and I are too old to look after another Klingon kid. We want to retire and live our lives, our lives. We just want something in this world for ourselves, to spend our waning years chasing down our dreams, not chasing after children. We gave you everything we could, Worf. We exhausted ourselves to raise you the best we knew how. Please don't make us drive ourselves into the grave doing the same for your son. Just take him, Worf. Please, take him. And Worf's like, fine, I'll take him. And Alexander lives with Worf on the Enterprise D for the rest of TNG. But when Worf transfers to Deep Space Nine following the destruction of the Enterprise, Alexander is nowhere to be seen. Worf explains that after the Enterprise crashed, he sent Alexander back to live with Helena and Sergei on Earth while he, Worf, went to the monastery on Boreth to get his head together. And we don't see Alexander again for like 3 years. And when he does show up again, it's because he's joined the Klingon military despite a dangerous lack of basic skills to fight in the Dominion War, hoping to prove something to Worf, his father, who he resents for abandoning him. And he's right. Worf does abandon him. Twice. And the second time is even worse because it comes after Worf's mother brings Alexander back to him and says we can't raise him. He needs to be with his father. I get sending Alexander to stay with his grandparents for a few weeks while Worf takes his sabbatical on Boreth, but once Worf knows he's gonna be on DS9 for a while, why not bring him along? True, DS9 isn't the safest place to be raising a child, but neither was the Enterprise. And there are other families with children roughly Alexander's age on the station. I'm not saying it would have been perfect, but father and son would have been together, and I'm sure that would have helped Alexander's abandonment issues. Now, obviously, the real reason Alexander doesn't move to DS9 with Worf is because the writers wanted it that way, and they had a previously established explanation for why Alexander wouldn't be around. He's living on Earth with Worf's parents, and they went with it. And that's fine. And I can't say the series suffers for not having Alexander around, because if I'm being honest, I never thought he was that great of a character anyway. But it doesn't make Worf look very good. Luckily, because Worf is a character on Deep Space Nine, his lousy parenting eventually becomes an intentional part of his character that is acknowledged and explored, rather than just an accidental trait he acquired due to haphazard writing. The creative team of DS9 could have just left Alexander on Earth. They didn't have to bring him back, but they did. And it was good for Alexander, and good for Worf, as a person and as a character. Unfortunately for Worf, as far as this video goes, and I know it must be tearing him up inside, canonically being a bad parent is still being a bad parent. And that's what Worf is. He takes a young child who has been deeply traumatized by the sudden and violent death of a parent and only adds to that trauma by repeatedly shipping him off to live elsewhere, making him feel like he's not good enough for the only biological parent he has left. You blew it, Worf. You had a son, man. You should have done right by him. Think of all the birthdays and Father's Days you missed out on. All the socks and tacky ties and mugs with corny sayings printed on them, and gift boxes of cheese and packaged meat you could have gotten over the years. And you didn't get any of that, did you? And that's your fault. You have to live with that, Worf. What's Klingon for father without honor? Vav Hutla Batla. Somebody should put that shit on a mug and send it to you. Do they still have Cafe Press in the 24th century? Let me find out. Do they still have? Anyway, I feel bad taking the piss out of poor Worf. Despite his awful track record as a parent, I do love the guy. He's one of my favorite characters. So let me leave Worf alone and move on to another parent from Star Trek The Next Generation, one of the good ones, Dr. Beverly Crusher. She only abandoned her child to be looked after by strangers for a year, which puts her one up on Worf all by itself. I'm sorry, I'm done. I'm done having a go at Worf. For real this time. Unless I think of something else. Dr. Beverly Crusher is the first regular Star Trek character who is established as a parent when we first meet them. The only other Trek regular parent before her is Kirk, and we don't find out he's a father until Star Trek II. Dr. Crusher is a mom from the start of her series, and her status as a parent is an extremely important part of her character. Some might even say too important. Beverly is often cited as an example of the problems the creative team of Star Trek The Next Generation had when it came to writing for women. After badass woman of action Tasha Yar is killed off in the first season and Dr. McCoy Only a Lady Catherine Pulaski departs after season 2, the only women left as main characters are Beverly and Deanna Troi, both of whom are placed in traditionally feminine roles as caregivers, doctors, counselors, mothers. Even Guinan, who avoids conventional gender tropes more successfully than Beverly or Deanna, has a decidedly matriarchal quality. Which is not to say that any of them are bad characters, just that, for the most part, the writers of TNG played it safe and opted not to challenge traditional views regarding gender roles and what types of characters were appropriate for women. They did eventually correct for this somewhat with the introduction of Ensign Ro, who leaves an impression despite appearing in only a handful of episodes, but the writers of Star Trek didn't really start to figure out how to create and write strong female characters who transcend conventional gender roles until Deep Space Nine, which is yet another reason why I think it's the best series in the franchise, but I digress. Beverly is a great mom. She stands up for her son, Wesley, she fights for him, she pushes back in the first season when Picard is a dick to him, and Picard eventually follows her lead and assumes a more fatherly role toward Wes himself. Yes, she's one of those moms who is so convinced that her child is perfect that it keeps her from seeing when Wesley actually does something wrong, like in The First Duty, when Wes goes along with the rest of Nova Squadron to cover up the death of one of their teammates. Until Wesley finally confesses, Beverly is 100% on his side, even when the evidence of his wrongdoing starts to accumulate. She's so committed to defending him that at one point, Wesley even tells her to stop because he's worried she'll end up hurting her own career by sticking her neck out for him. Wesley is a teenager at the start of TNG, but we get a glimpse at how Beverly might have been as the mom of a younger child in the episode Brothers, where she looks after 9-year-old Willie Potts, who has been quarantined after being infected by a potentially deadly parasite. Willie's not doing so great, what with the whole being isolated from everyone due to having a life-threatening infection, but Beverly cares for him as only a great doctor and a great mom can, and it's nice to see. Brothers is also the episode where we meet one of Star Trek's all-time worst parents, this sick old bastard, Dr. Noonien Soong. Great character, brilliant cyberneticist, fun opportunity for Brent Spiner to stretch his acting legs a bit. Terrible, terrible, terrible father. Builds sentient androids, abandons them when he has to escape a colony that's under attack, lets them think he's dead for years, and when he finally decides he wants to get in touch with Data, does he call? Does he send a subspace message and say, hey, it's me, I'm alive? Drop by Turlina 3 when you get a chance, but don't take too long because I'm kinda dying? No, he activates a homing device that causes Data to hijack the Enterprise. Just text somebody, dude! So, I've been talking a lot about characters from TNG. I'm gonna get to a few more from DS9 in a minute, but before that, I want to survey the rest of the franchise and see if there are any notable parents I haven't touched on yet. So let me see. In Voyager, there's Tuvok. We're told he has kids, but they never really come into play. There's Admiral Paris, rest in peace Richard Hurd, who becomes a recurring character late in the series and seems to have been a lousy father to the greatest Starfleet officer of all time, Lieutenant J.G. Tom Paris. There's Tom and his eventual wife B'Elanna Torres, who become parents in the final minutes of the series, not much there to go on. There's Ensign Samantha Wildman, who gives birth to daughter Naomi early in the series. We end up seeing a lot more of Naomi than we do of Samantha, but all indications are that she's a good mom. And who else is there from Voyager? Oh yeah, Q, who turns out to be a good father? Kinda? In a warped, Q-ish way? Let's not forget Seven of Nine's mom and dad. Here's a pair for the shitty parents' hall of shame. Hey, I've got a great idea. Let's follow the Borg around in our defenseless little ship, and because it's not enough to merely risk our own fool-ass necks, let's bring our child along too. How'd that turn out for you and your wife and kids, Magnus, you asshole? I'm glad you got assimilated. As far as Enterprise, there's that episode where Trip gets pregnant. The less said about that, the better. And then there's Elizabeth, the clone baby created from the DNA of Trip and T'Pol by evil Buckaroo Banzai, who died tragically. And I guess we can count Captain Archer's father, who we see a bit of in the series pilot, and who seems like a good dad. Kelvin timeline movies, there's George Kirk, who seems like he would have been a good dad if he hadn't had to, sacrifice himself to save the life of his wife and newborn son and everyone else on his ship. I mean, he's Thor. Come on, he would have been a great parent. And we find out Sulu is a dad in Star Trek Beyond, but it doesn't really go anywhere, though I'm sure Sulu is a fine parent because Sulu. I already mentioned Riker and Troi on Star Trek Picard. On Discovery, we have, let's see. Oh yeah, Sarek. I knew I was forgetting someone because this is scripted. Sarek is a tough one. In fact, in an earlier draft of the script for this video, I didn't even include Sarek, apart from jokingly acknowledging his existence as the parent of one of the most important characters in the franchise. That's because, with his various appearances in Star Trek The Next Generation, the movies, TNG, and now his recurring role in Discovery, we've seen so much of Sarek and of how he relates to his children that I'm not comfortable assigning him to either the best parent or worst parent category. This is the trouble with binary systems of categorization. Most subjects will probably fall, obviously, onto one side or the other, but there will always be those who don't rightly belong in either. And a good system, one capable of clearly and accurately representing reality rather than crudely reducing it and distorting it, will be able to account for the non-binary. With that in mind, I think I need to establish a category for those Star Trek parents who are neither among the best nor the worst. I'll call it complicated parents, because they're not all bad, but they do make some mistakes. And the thumbnail for this category has got to be this guy. When we meet Sarek in the classic Star Trek episode Journey to Babel, he and his son Spock have been estranged for years. And while the episode attempts to show that their rocky relationship is due to stubbornness on both their parts, I think it's pretty obvious that this is all Sarek's fault. Sarek resents Spock for joining Starfleet instead of following in his footsteps and attending the Vulcan Science Academy. That's not something a good parent does. That's something a shitty parent who views their children as nothing more than extensions of themselves does. Despite being a calm, logical Vulcan, it's obvious Spock wants his father's approval, but Sarek withholds that approval for much of Spock's life for no good reason, even though Spock is awesome in every way. Also, in Star Trek V, it's implied that another reason Sarek resents Spock is because of his human heritage, which, A, not cool, Sarek, and B, if you're so racist toward humans that you're gonna hold being half human against your son, maybe don't have children with a human. Side note, Amanda? Awesome mom. Always has Spock's back, sticks up for him when Sarek is being a dick in classic Trek and in Discovery. But Sarek isn't all bad. Throughout his numerous appearances in multiple Trek series and films, it becomes obvious that he truly cares about Spock, that he loves him, as he later admits through a mind meld with Captain Picard, when his logic is failing him due to Bendai syndrome in the TNG episode titled Sarek. In Star Trek IV, Sarek even apologizes for opposing Spock's entrance into Starfleet. Sort of. He says his judgment in that matter may have been incorrect. In Star Trek Discovery, we learn that Sarek and Amanda adopted and raised Michael Burnham, a human whose parents were killed when she was only a little girl. Michael winds up estranged from Spock for many years, but her relationship with Sarek seems okay for the most part. Then again, Michael did attend the Vulcan Science Academy. God, you're such a dick. All in all, Sarek comes across as a moral, well-intentioned, but emotionally unavailable person who, for whatever reason, surrounds himself with emotional people who are constantly hurt by his stoicism. He's a good person. He tries to do right by the people he cares about, but he's not always capable of giving them what they need from him. I'm guessing that a few of you watching might be able to relate to having a parent like that. Or maybe even being a parent like that. The other parents who, for me, belong in the complicated parents category are the O'Briens, Miles and Keiko. They're probably the most realistic parents in the whole franchise because, unlike most other Star Trek protagonists, they actually sell the stress they experience as parents, as a married couple, as individuals. Definitely not bad people or bad parents, but maybe not the most responsible. And, okay, I'm mostly talking about Miles here. I love Miles O'Brien. He's a fantastic character. But as we all know, from the moment he sets foot on Deep Space Nine, his life becomes an inescapable living nightmare. Let me put it to you this way. The next Trek Actually video is going to be about the darkest episodes in the franchise. Expect to see that face in that video. A lot. And, at a certain point, after it's become clear that the universe is trying to kill you, isn't it your responsibility as a parent to get your child the hell out of there? Also, maybe don't have any more children on a space station? That becomes a major point of conflict in an interstellar war? I'm just saying. The O'Briens, of course, are not the only parents on DS9. There's also Worf, who I talked about already, and two others, both dads, who inarguably belong front and center on the best parent side of this, whatever this is. I'm going to close the video with them. Congrats, fellas, you're in the main event. And I'll start with this guy. Rom is often cited as one of Deep Space Nine's best characters because his character travels such an interesting and satisfying arc. He goes from cowering under the authority of his brother Quark, struggling to earn profit in the traditional Ferengi way, to striking out on his own and making a life for himself outside that tradition. And what starts Rom down that path is his love for his son Nog. There's a great scene at the end of the episode Heart of Stone from Deep Space Nine's third season, where Quark forbids Nog from attending Starfleet Academy, and Rom stands up to Quark, takes his son's side, and tells Nog to go to the Academy if that's what he wants, wishing him luck and saying, "I would be proud to have a son in Starfleet." It's a wonderful moment, but I think Rom's journey to being a great dad and an independent, unconventional Ferengi actually starts a couple of years before, in the first season episode, A Man Alone, when Keiko O'Brien starts the station school. At first, Rom refuses to allow Nog to attend, insisting that his son will have a proper Ferengi education. But after Keiko argues that it would benefit Nog to go to school with non-Ferengi children and learn about other cultures, Rom changes his mind. He still has a long way to go at that point, but it's a start. Soon enough, Rom becomes Nog's #1 champion on the station. He even commissions a custom-made Starfleet cadet uniform for his son, a sweet gesture made even sweeter by how unnecessary it is, since Nog gets an official one when he reports to the Academy. Rom is like one of those parents who instantly becomes a fan of the sport their kid plays. Even if they don't understand it, even if they've never even heard of it before, there they are in the stands at every game, cheering, rooting, holding up signs, wearing team merch, all to support their child. Rom believes in his son so much that eventually he follows in Nog's footsteps. Not exactly, Rom doesn't join Starfleet, but he does quit his job at Quark's and join the Bajoran militia as a technician, where he's finally able to pursue his interest in engineering. Being a good dad not only improves his son's life, but his own life as well. But as good of a dad as Rom is, I don't think he's the best parent on Deep Space Nine. The best parent on Deep Space Nine. The best parent in the entire Star Trek franchise, for my money, is Rom's boss. No, he doesn't even have kids. No, I already covered him. the boss of the entire station. Thank you. Jesus. What's the deal with this bit, anyway? Who am I arguing with? Myself? Would it work better if I established another character who, within the fiction of the bit, edits the video and adds the graphics on the monitor? What would their name be? Maybe Vince? That work? Let's go with that. Thank you, Vince. Jesus. Ben Sisko, as I've said before, is the most complete character in all of Star Trek. We see him as a commander and a subordinate, as a boss and a friend, as a skeptic and a messiah, as a widower and a husband, and as a son and a father. And of all those different roles, I think it's safe to say father is the most important to Sisko, the one closest to the heart of his character. Sisko's relationship with his son Jake is arguably the most important relationship on the show. And that's quite a statement to make, because more than any other series in the franchise, Deep Space Nine is about relationships. Ben's love for his son comes before anything else. He puts his son first and sets his own desires and expectations aside. When Jake tells him that he wants to become a writer rather than follow in his footsteps and join Starfleet, Ben sets his initial disappointment aside and supports his son's writing 100%. Take notes, Sarek. Oh, never mind, you're dead. Take notes, Worf. And like Rom, we see that being a good parent makes Ben a better person too. An early source of conflict between father and son is Jake's friendship with Nog, whom Ben initially considers to be a bad influence. Ben thinks Jake would be better off not spending so much time with Nog, until he discovers that Jake has secretly been teaching Nog to read. Sisko, growing past his stereotypical views of Ferengi, is an important part of his character development early in the series, and I'd like to think seeing the compassion and friendship Jake demonstrates with Nog is a crucial step in that process. The thing to remember when evaluating the character of fictional characters is that they only have the qualities they do because they've been created that way. Sometimes those qualities are there deliberately as the result of conscious choices made by the writers, directors, producers, and performers who bring the characters to life. Other times, the qualities are an accidental product, something the creators didn't anticipate. I don't think anyone intended to make Worf a shitty dad, it just kind of worked out that way. Sarek, on the other hand, is clearly a less than ideal parent because the writers thought that would make him a better character. And I agree. Would the dynamic between Sarek and Spock be as compelling if Sarek were as good of a dad as Ben Sisko? Then again, maybe it would. It would be different, for sure, but that doesn't mean it would necessarily be bad. The dynamic between Ben and Jake is one of the strongest elements of their show, and it's obvious that Ben Sisko is a good dad by design, that the creators of his character made him that way on purpose. That purpose comes through not just in how Sisko is written, but in how Avery Brooks performs him. Brooks is an actor capable of overpowering, arresting charisma, but he sometimes struggles in scenes that are heavy with plot exposition or technobabble. He reads as flat, disengaged from the material, but when Sisko plays a scene with Jake, he comes alive. His eyes light up, he's fully present in the scene, and he's as good as any actor on any Star Trek show has ever been. Avery Brooks was committed to Sisko being portrayed as a good father. He was so committed that he objected to the ending of the series, which has Sisko leaving everyone behind to go be with the Prophets. He insisted the writers add a line where Sisko promises his wife, Cassidy, who is pregnant with their child, that he will be back. Prophets or not, Ben Sisko wouldn't just abandon his son and his expecting wife. And I have to admit, the fact that Sisko's farewell scene is with Cassidy rather than Jake has always rubbed me the wrong way. It's a great scene, and I appreciate wanting to emphasize the importance of Sisko's relationship with his wife, but just as being a father is at the heart of Ben Sisko, his relationship with Jake is at the heart of Deep Space Nine. And if Sisko is going to reach out to any one person to make his goodbyes, that person should be Jake. We leave the series with a shot of Jake standing at a window, gazing out at the wormhole, that all-important link to his father, broken or at least indefinitely interrupted. Kira joins him to offer a comforting smile, a reassuring arm around the shoulder, and the camera pulls back until Jake, Kira, and the station itself are just another speck of light in the vastness of space. Of course, the fact that we're denied a final farewell between father and son only serves to make that parting shot that much more wrenching. And maybe that was the point. Great writing, great drama, great art. It can break your heart. I can't think of any parent-child relationship in Star Trek that's left a deeper, more lasting imprint on my heart than Ben and Jake Sisko. So, if Ben Sisko is Star Trek's best parent, who's the worst? I don't know, Dukat? Remember when he found Ziyal in that Breen labor camp and he was like 2 seconds from killing her before he changed his mind? Dukat being Dukat, I'm sure he thought of himself as the galaxy's greatest dad, but not killing your kid doesn't make you a good parent, Duke. It's the bare minimum. And that goes for you too, Tane. Jesus, no wonder Ziyal was hot for Garrick. They're both infinite gravity wells of daddy issues thanks to these two. No corny mugs or packaged meat for either one of you. Hey folks, hope you enjoyed this episode of Trek Actually. I'm not going to do any patron shoutouts this time because I'm saving those for the next episode, which is coming up later this month, in 2 weeks, as a matter of fact. That being the case, let me just take a minute to remind you that if you enjoy the work I do, you can help me continue to do it by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives and supporting this channel with a monthly donation of any amount. $5 a month or higher earns you a shout out, but any amount from $1 on up gets you access to my patron-only feed, which is where you can vote in polls to choose future Trek Actually topics and submit questions for me to answer in my twice-monthly Ask Away live streams and get the opportunity to participate in my monthly video calls with patrons. So check it out. If it sounds interesting, patreon.com/Steve Shives. Also, don't forget that besides this YouTube gig, I also co-host a Star Trek-themed comedy podcast alongside the great Jason Harding called The Ensign's Log. If you like the Star Trek and you like the funny, you'll love The Ensign's Log. We're in our 3rd season and having a blast, and we'd love for you to join us. Links are in the description. Give a listen to The Ensign's Log. That's it. See you in 2 weeks for the next Trek Actually episode, which will be on the topic, what is actually Star Trek's darkest episode? Should be fun. See you then. Take care, everybody.